Okay, welcome back to this YouTube channel and another brief, I say brief, it could be about 20 minutes or so, summary of the social distribution of crime. So really focusing on class, gender and ethnicity. Now this is going to work from page 69 to 79 of your pack. I want to really just clarify some of the information, just check you're happy with it and explain a few areas that may have come up that you're not familiar with before. I'm going to skip some of the tasks, so some like concept glossaries and key finger summaries, I will leave those to you, but I just want to go through and talk through a few elements of the material. And as I say, and I said in my previous video, if you've already completed this section and you're up to date with your pack and you had no major issues, don't feel you have to watch the entire thing. As I say, just to skip through, and if there's any areas you're not familiar with or you want a bit more discussion, just watch those sections. So let's crack on. Now, a few other facts, other things we need to know. So, at the very top of page 69, for this topic, we need to know about the patterns and trends, and they need to be relatively recent and up to date. We also need to have a think about sociological explanations. So part of this I've left to you because it is a review of the materials we've already done. We have finished the theory a little while ago, and all the theories really come back here to just explain what's happening and bring their view of why particular groups are committing offences. So I'd hope a lot of this is familiar to you and doubles up as a little bit of a review and a recap of previous topics. We're also going to think about class, gender, ethnicity. As I said, these are the three social groups we focus on. Age has a role to play, but that kind of gets incorporated into a lot of the other groups. Location and ecological approaches isn't a specific area of the pack anymore, so we won't focus too much on it, but we'll stick with our CGEs. And let's start with social class. So the facts for social class, what we need to recognise is statistically, the working class are more likely to commit crime. We know that from realism. We know that from victimology. Working class are more likely to commit a crime. But the middle class do commit crimes. Let's not forget that middle class, upper class are equally as, there's some of the same values are still there, so they may equally commit crime. And this relates to stuff like the dark figure of crime. So what we're trying to consider is how we explain the working class committing crime, how do we explain the middle and upper class crime, but also how do we explain the middle and upper class crime being hidden. So there's a lot of sort of areas that we've worked on previously. So patterns and trends. The first thing is that this is quite factual, and you need to try and be factual. You need to have evidence to support your points. So one example would be only a third of prisoners report being in paid employment in the 4 weeks before being sent to prison or going into custody. 13% report never having had a job, which comes from the Prison Reform Trust in 2016. It's also, crime stats, and we've used this Police UK website previously when we came up with our cognitive crime maps, and I would say it's always worth having a look just to see what's happening, whether it's in your road or in the town centre. In the coming months, it might be equally interesting to watch what happens to the crime rate, particularly busy areas like town centre. Now most bits of town have shut down, most streets have shut down. It would be interesting to see how substantially the crime rate drops. So that could be something more, not a specific thing for us, but it's more of just an interesting awareness of social change. So this is obviously worth adding to your pack, and there's a few other bits that will pop up in a second. So the working class do commit more street crime. We know that street crime costs around £4 billion a year. And sociologists try to explain why this happens. So we'll jump to traditional Marxism first of all. Now, we know Marxists like Gordon say that capitalism is criminogenic. It causes crime. Crime is a rational response to capitalism. And it highlights stuff like greed, being motivated, competition, all created by capitalism, which leads to crime occurring. So capitalism is the source of crime. It is criminogenic. So have a think back to what we said in the past and try and add that into your pack. Obviously, Marxism being a key theory here. Left realism, again, the same arguments we've seen to try and explain why the working class commit crime. The three key definitions that they introduce are relative deprivation, marginalisation, and subcultures. Relative deprivation is your sense of loss. You lack something compared to someone else. Marginalisation is, think like the margin of a page, you're on the edge of society. This could increase your chances of committing a crime, because if you feel marginalised, isolated, excluded, why are you going to follow the rules that everyone else does? You're also do your own thing. You'll be happily go and commit crime because you don't feel part of society. You don't feel any stake or any value or meaning to following social norms. And subcultures, if you're drawn into, think back to the very beginning, so it could be a conflict culture, it could be a criminal subculture, it could be stuff like focal concerns or even drift. We drift in and out of deviance. We move into subcultures where criminal and deviant behaviour is part of that group. And as I say, it's the working class who are more likely to be drawn into that. If you think about legitimate opportunity structures and illegitimate opportunity structures, the working class are going to be more likely to sort of need or use the illegitimate structure. So you might want to refer back to page 42, 45 and maybe think about some of the ways this could relate to crime. With the gap fill, we have Merton and the strain theory. Now this relates to subculture. So as you can see, the ideas, you've got those four concepts. So Merton explains working class crime through strain theory. He argues that everyone in society experiences the strain between the shared goals of blank. With our words on that list, we would probably put the idea of financial success. And I'm just going to cross off these words we're going through. Financial success. And the legitimate means of being able to achieve them. Gaining qualifications through education and a career. The working class are denied the opportunity to achieve goals through legitimate means and are therefore more likely to try and achieve goals through innovation. This explains the higher rate of utilitarian crime among the working class. So that's ticking off those camps. On page 70, subcultural theories. Again, we've mentioned Miller and the focal concerns of the working class. And again, his focal concerns, his argument was that the working class have their own sets of values. Toughness, smartness, excitement, and how this could lead to crime. So toughness might lead to violent crime by trying to achieve masculinity, being tough. Smartness might lead to crimes like shoplifting in order to look smart, to have designer clothes but you can't afford them, steal them or buy knockoff, dodgy knockoffs. And excitement again could be violence, it could be joyriding, it could be thefts, and so gaining some kind of thrill seeking. Sort of think about Edgework and Ling as an example. Now, evaluation of that is, do you need to commit crime to achieve these things? Is it only the working class who would try to achieve it? Environmental factors. Now, again, we haven't done much on the environment and ecology, but there are two kind of key elements here that we need to point out. So first is differential association. Now, Shaw and McKay say that criminal deviant behaviour is learned. It's kind of looking at socialisation. It's a different socialisation. Essentially, people are living in areas where there's higher levels of crime. Crime and deviance is more likely to be accepted, tolerated, passed down from generation to generation. So it's a learned behaviour. And it's our interaction, and we're more likely to interact with criminals where we learn those techniques. This also does double back with Sutherland under sort of parts of differential association, that we learn to be criminal, we learn techniques of criminalisation through the people and the company we keep, and it becomes normalised behaviour. But also we have the zone of transition. So this is Shaw and McKay again, talking about how zone of transition, but there's a high turnover of people, let's say a very sort of a city centre. Shaw and McKay were talking about, obviously they're part of the Chicago school in the 1920s, so they're talking about Chicago in the 1920s, a very different era and structure of society. So it doesn't always work perfectly, but I will sometimes think about the zones in London. So zone 1 being the centre, and then you sort of go out through the zones to sort of 6, 7, 8, which would be kind of on the fringes of Essex. Zone 1, the centre, is where you see the highest turnover. That's like you know, if you go Liverpool Street, you know, all the people come in, you've got all the offices and all that area around there. People flood in, people flood out. Because of that constant movement in and out, there's less social cohesion, sense of community. Therefore, it's more likely to commit crime because people easily travel in, commit a crime, travel out. If you ever go to that area on a Sunday, you know, it's completely deserted, everything shuts because there's no one there. So that could be a good example of a zone in transition. But again, the idea being highest population turnover, lowest sense of community, shared norms and values, higher chances of crime. Now, differential association. Now, for Sutherland, differential association, very similar to, just jumping back to Shaw and McKay and differential association. But with Sutherland, he does try and explain the middle classes committing crime. So the idea that if you go into a business or a company and, you know, the notions of making money and success are really important, criminal behaviour is accepted and tolerated and encouraged, it becomes normalised and you're more likely to commit those behaviours. Think Wolf of Wall Street as a really good example of that. You know, this idea of criminal activity becoming normalised and people don't question it. Now, the evaluation, obviously, is it just the middle class who are affected by differential association? We know that's not the case. Shaw and McKay highlight that the working class have their own differential association. And even on sort of a slightly smaller scale, if you grew up in a home with domestic violence, you know, the statistics show that you are more likely to be involved in domestic violence as an adult. So again, it could be differential association isn't just a phenomena of the working class or the middle class, but obviously everyone could be affected by that. And then just sort of taking a pause for a second before we move forward, it's just thinking about some synoptic links. You know, there are links to the whole of this topic. Sociology is one mass of connected and overlapping ideas. So there are links to what we've looked at in the past. And again, I know the exams aren't taking place, so, you know, we don't need to know this as strictly as we would in any other situation. But we, you know, most sociologists, most examiners, we love a good old synoptic link. So you'd love to see it, and obviously it is recognised. So if you think about education and families, there are lots of things we've talked about that could explain crime. And just to, obviously, I'll give you a little bit of time. You can pause the video if you want to have a think, and then I'll obviously play again when you want the video answers to be revealed. So I'm going to reveal the answers in just a second. So if you're still with us, here are your answers. So think about what happens to working class in education that may deny them opportunity. So we think about Marxism and reproduction legitimation, streaming, subcultures, labelling. These all cause the working class to lack opportunities. In the New Right, you know, there are links to family life. So that could also help explain some form of criminality. You think of Murray, Dennis and Erdos, fatherless families, poor socialisation. So there is this connection to these differential association arguments. There's some merit to them. And lastly, Newburn, who is also, I know we've kind of jumped a little bit forward, but we have Newburn, who also talks about the dark figure of crime. We've mentioned the dark figure of crime in our previous video. So as you mentioned, imagine you've got the water level and you've got the sea. Above the sea is the iceberg you can see, and that's what we are aware of. And when it comes to crime, this would be the crime we see in official stats and government reports and on the telly and on the news. This is what we can see. Below the surface, however, is a much more substantial piece of ice. And again, this is the stuff that's hidden. This is the dark figure of crime. This is what we don't see under the water. And this is what the idea of the sort of the dark figure of crime, this like iceberg of crime, what it relates to. So this is obviously our figure here. So that's one of the things Nuber mentions, is that the dark figure of crime, often what is hidden is generally the crimes we don't report, but also middle class crimes are more likely to be hidden. The crimes of the powerless are more likely to be on our radar. Like we said, street crime is worth about 4 billion, and we are aware of that very prominently. Middle class crime can sometimes be worth 40 billion. Doesn't make it into crime stats as frequently. And that could be things like it's harder to detect, it's easily covered up and hidden, issues are dealt with internally rather than publicly. Okay, and then middle class crime. So again, why did the middle class commit crime? So we've got a couple of theorists. So Gordon for Marxism, looking at the continued pursuit of wealth and profit from capitalism. Functionalism talks again about in corporations, people turn to illegal opportunities to achieve those goals. So it's turning to the illegitimate opportunity structure can also occur when you are already you've gained success through the legitimate opportunity. You're on that structure, you're in a job, but you might use illegitimate means to gain further success, striving for those kind of key features. Now, application task would be of the Bangladesh research factory for Primark that collapsed, or the Grenfell Tower incident. I'm going to skip these slides and leave them to you, and you can fill those in and take your own time on those. The last people I want to flag up is Matza. So Matza talks about how this culture of techniques of neutralization. We talked about Matza at the very beginning, drift and delinquency, that we drift into criminality and we drift back out, and we use techniques like everyone's doing it, didn't harm anyone, it was just this once, to justify criminal behaviour. And again, part of it is avoiding it becoming part of our sense of self and identity. Often in labelling theory, you drift into delinquency, you get charged, punished, caught, a label is attached, and then that could lead to secondary deviance and beyond. This bit is kind of the pre-label, where you're drifting in and out, and it's only when you get caught that the label will potentially stick. So you've got examples like the PPI scandal that kind of could be used as part of this techniques of drift and delinquency. And there's that red quote, every turn industry tried to wriggle out of its liability. So when people were sold PPI products falsely or inappropriately, companies didn't really push to give that money back. They would try and find ways around it. And even just before the deadline of that PPI claim, there were new sort of laws and rules that were brought in that allowed some companies to be examined again to see whether they've missold PPI. Okay, so just a few examples here of things to consider for social class and crime. We've got the invisible crimes of the powerful. So concepts like de-labeling. They can pay for lawyers, they can avoid negative labeling. We've got this idea, think about some of the concepts we looked at with Cicero and negotiation. There's mass underreporting of the crimes of the powerful, and power and trust. Most high powerful people maintain roles of position of trust where we don't suspect them, and people can get away. So the contemporary example would be Harold Shipman. He was in a very prominent power of trust as a GP, and he got away with hundreds and hundreds of murders because people just trusted him as a GP. They didn't question what he was doing. So again, that could be something to look at if you want a little bit further research. Okay, and then you've got all the consolidation materials that you can work through. So I'm going to skip through all these so you can look at that yourself. And then we've got reasons why the working class appear to commit more crime. These could be some of the exam questions, obviously sociological explanations of corporate crime and why some criminals tend to be from the poorest group. So these are kind of the nature of the questions that may be asked in the exam. So as I say, I'll leave those for you to take a look at. Okay, so we'll leave it here for now, because as I say, this video has gone on for about 20 minutes, so I don't want to bore you to death and give you a chance to have a break. So I'll pause it for now, and then I'll follow up with the next topic of gender. On page 72, you have got the glossary. I'd recommend having a go at that when you're ready. But until then, thank you for watching.